In 1897, in a field in the south of France, an amazing discovery was made. It was near a town called Coligny, and so the object that was discovered in many pieces is known as the Coligny Calendar. It's one of the most complete calendars of the pre-Christian year as it was observed by Celtic peoples, at least in the south of France, the peoples known to history as the Gauls. So it's important to make clear straight away that the calendar isn't preserved as a whole. In fact, only around 40% in around 150 fragments of the calendar survives. But we have enough of a spread of the calendar that researchers are fairly confident that they can fill in what's missing based obviously on sort of the calendar and on the days that we would expect in a lunar calendar as it is. Now, it was buried possibly in a kind of ritualistic way, as it was found beside a bronze statue, probably showing the deity Mars or some kind of Gaulish equivalent of Mars, as the figure was holding a spear in his hand, which of course is related to that Roman war god. Now, the calendar itself, as reconstructed, would have been over a meter wide and around 80 centimeters tall at the time. So this was a large object made of bronze. Now, it's been inscribed, and the kind of script that they used is the Latin alphabet as we know it, but the language was in Gaulish. So that's very interesting because we don't have a great deal of long-form content in Gaulish. Also interesting, of course, that the Gauls use neighbouring scripts when we find them inscribing things. So when we find Gaulish, it's either in one of the Italic alphabets, so like Etruscan or Etruscan derived, or in Greek, or in this case in Latin. Unlike many calendars in the classical world, this wasn't a solar calendar that followed the flight of the sun, but rather a lunar calendar which followed the lunar months. Months either had 29 or 30 days in them, and just like our modern calendar in the West, they had 12 months in a year. However, unlike what we do today, they counted in a 5-year cycle, adding in 2 intercalary months in every 2 or so years. This was in order to keep the solar year, which has 365 days, and the lunar year, which has around 354 or 355 days, in sync. It's necessary to do this because otherwise with each year, the lunar and the solar cycles will go further out of sync, meaning that unless you add in these special months, like the Roman month of intercalaris, a special month to make up for the days that are lost in the lunar cycle, it would mean that eventually you start getting festivals that are completely unmatched with the time of year they're meant to be, like having Christmas in April, for instance. Now, my main aim with this video is, rather than looking at the calendrical aspects of this, and there's plenty of information on that out there, but rather to look at the linguistic side. What does it tell us about these early Celts and how they looked at the year? What does it tell us about the Gaulish language and how the Gauls are related with other Celtic groups today? Now, first, let's take a look at the months in this calendar. The first is called Samoni. Then we have Duman, Rioros, Anagantio, Ogron, Kutios, Giamoni, Simiusona, Equos, Elembiu, Edrini, and Cantlos. Now, there are a few of these names that give us a clue as to which time of year these months fell in. One of the ways we can do this is by looking at the modern Celtic languages, or even better, the medieval Celtic languages, given that these are closer in time to this calendar from the 2nd century AD. In particular, the most useful ones will be Irish, which is recorded first as Old Irish, and then medieval Welsh and Breton. These are the best attested medieval languages. So first of all, we can see that Samoni most likely has to do with summer. This is because we have in Old Irish a word like samain and samrad, as well as in the Breton and Welsh, so Brythonic languages, a word like ham. We then find later on, about 6 months later, Giamoni, which appears to be related to words for winter in the Old Irish and Old Welsh languages, and so this seems to match up. However, there's a bit of a problem here because Samoni seems to resemble this Old Irish word for samain. However, we also find the seemingly related word Samhain, which is a festival held in November, so clearly not being held in the summer, and this is quite confusing. On the other hand, there is equally compelling evidence that Beltane, which is 6 months from Samhain, was considered as the beginning of the year. There are also other possibilities, for instance, that, as in the Coligny Calendar, the year was divided in 2 halves, or that the 2 dates represent the beginning of the year in 2 different types of calendars, for example, agricultural, civil, or religious. This mismatch between the later Samhain being in November and the seemingly summer-connected word of Samoni has led some people to suggest that perhaps we're looking at the wrong etymology for the month, and maybe it's actually going back to a different root word in Proto-Celtic, something like Samoni, which would mean something like together or in a group, related likely to words like Dutch samen, maybe English same as well, verzamelen, this kind of meaning of togetherness as well. What's interesting is that one of the notes that is preserved beside the month of Samoni mentions the Trinox Samoni, the 3 nights of Samoni. And again, depending on how we interpret this, perhaps this is some kind of festival similar to what's being held around Samhain, or maybe it's more like Beltane. If it is in the summer, if it's the summer months, this might be a reflection of that being held in this period. The Gaulish word Trinox, 3 nights, 3-night festival, attested on the calendar of Coligny, probably refers to a 3-day period rather than merely 3 successive evenings, and the modern Welsh expressions of wythnos, week, and pythefnos, fortnight, are literally 8 nights and 15 nights respectively. So perhaps we're looking rather than at nighttime festivals, just general festivities, as this is attested in later Celtic languages too. Another interesting name that we're more secure about is the month name Equos, which means horse. Now this is found throughout several earlier Celtic languages, and indeed in some of the modern Celtic languages as well. That Proto-Celtic root Equos is quite similar to the Proto-Indo-European word. It's where we get many of our words for horse and related, like words like stallion or mare or foal, from in the Indo-European languages today. And this then seems to be some kind of month of the horse. So what's horse month about? Well, the short answer is we don't really know. For a lot of Indo-European peoples, horses are pretty important. We know that they're doing horse sacrifices in Ireland. It's described with the High King at Tara. Read that at your own discretion, I would say. In the Germanic world, we find horse sacrifice going on as well. Tacitus mentions sort of sacred horses and things going on, so maybe it's ritual. Maybe it's got something to do with cavalry. We know the Gauls were pretty successful riders. The Romans called them the Equites, of course, which is related to that word Equos, as we'll see. So maybe it's something to do with mustering of troops, mustering of horsemen. Perhaps it's when horses are being bred. Again, the difficulty is that we're so unsure about when the Gaulish year begins and how to link it with the months that we have in the times of year. That makes it tricky to say, oh yes, this is when horses are breeding, or when it's likely that men would muster for battle, which would probably be happening at some point at the end of the summer when the harvest is in, but before the frost kicks in, that kind of thing. So really, we're not too sure about what this horse month is all about. The name of the month of Equos is peculiar because of the appearance of the sequence Qu, which is very unusual in Gaulish, especially at the time of the Coligny Calendar. The root word appears easily identifiable to the linguist. It would seem to be related to the Equos of the Romans, a word derived from the Indo-European root Hequos, meaning horse. A problem nonetheless immediately arises with the identification. It is well known that in Gaulish the sequence Qu became P. The Gaulish word for horse is also well known from the name of the horse-riding goddess Epona, and many other names of places and people. In the absence of any solid alternative to this interpretation, the word has been considered to represent a dialectal archaic form, or perhaps a loanword from the Latin. Regardless of the word's origin, the presence of this animal, which occupied a special place in the lives of many Indo-European peoples, is hardly surprising. The ancient Thessalian calendar, for example, contains a month named Hippodromios, that is, the month of horse racing. The link between the horse and the end of the spring in the Gaulish world remains a mystery, but it probably was related to a use of the horse rather than to the own life cycle of this creature. The Gauls were famous for their cavalry, which can be seen leading the Gaulish warriors on the cauldron of Gundestrup. The return of the favourable weather of the spring may signal the beginning of different equestrian activities, racing, warfare, or even sacrifices. This is from the very readable but not entirely uncontroversial World of the Gauls, Foundations of a Celtic Philosophy, written by Anton Busquet, a historian of religion. Now, there's a lot in there, and it's a pretty interesting take. It's a very unique take on Gaulish religion, so I would put that little caveat in, but if you are interested, then do go and check that out. Another of the months that we can link to a known Celtic etymology is Riuros, which appears to mean something like cold. Now, this can be seen in many of the modern Celtic languages as well as in their medieval forebears, and the Proto-Celtic root freswo is likely related with what we find in the Germanic languages, words like freeze and frost and other things to mean cold. Another of these etymologies that comes from a different root but also appears to mean extreme cold is ogron, where we again find several of the reflexes in newer Celtic languages that are recorded from a Proto-Celtic root of something like ovgro for very cold. And that would suggest that these early months are not in the summer because, well, why do we have these riuros ogron, meaning cold, if it were the summer? Now, an interesting one that's a little bit different is Cantlos, because Cantlos can be related to the Proto-Celtic cantlo, which means song or singing. And particularly interesting here is that, as far as I'm aware, and correct me if I'm wrong, modern Celtic speakers, the only reflex of this that survives into the modern day is the Breton word kentil, which means a lesson. Now, you might have spotted it already, but that word cantlo in the Proto-Celtic language is related to words in English like chant. Chant comes in from French, I believe chanter is still the word to sing in French. That goes back to an older Latin form of something like cantare, which is very similar to Spanish still today, which again means to sing, and you get words like canción in Spanish for a song as well. Obviously these words have come into English, so you have today the word chant, which is a specific kind of singing, I guess, but you also have a word like incantation, which sort of has that Latin root where we don't have the sh sound at the beginning, and a word like enchantment, which has the same, so that's quite interesting. Busquet again has a very colourful interpretation of where this might come from, which I thought I would read to you in full again. The reproduction cycle of a large part of the plants comes to an end during this month. The wheat has already been harvested and the grain has been stored for the coming year. The barley is now cut off in the fields as the heat of the summer slowly fades away, replaced by the freshness of the fall. If the internal strife between the light and the lofty has been sufficiently harmonious, alternating the heat and the light of the sun with the showers of the dark clouds in good proportions, the fruits of the strife of earth and sky are then plentiful. All over the globe, the end of the harvest marked a time of celebration for populations heavily dependent on agriculture. Gathered outside while enjoying the freshly prepared food made with the product of their hard work, the people eat and drink, dance and sing to honour the benevolence of nature, the strife that allows the perpetuation of life and the continuation of their own being in particular. The songs of Cantlos may precisely be linked with these celebrations, or even sung during the long days of work for the harvest, when men, women and children are all gathered in the fields, doing a repetitive task that invites the uttering of chants of yore, transmitted from generation to generation by people who went through a great number of seasons. The month of the chants may therefore be filled with the voice of the teuta, singing in unison while its members work together for their survival. So, quite possibly, the singing has to do with the harvest songs, perhaps rites or some kind of religious celebrations with the coming of the harvest. It has been noted that we don't know of any equinox feasts that were celebrated by the Celtic peoples before Christianity, so we can't really root this in very firm evidence. Again, it's a nice way of thinking about it, but it's hard to know for certain whether this is where Cantlos comes from, and maybe it's something else entirely, but this seems as good a guess as any. Yeah, I think one of the coolest things about the calendar is the fact that most likely the information in the calendar, this system of keeping time, wasn't worked out with pencil and paper or inscribed, but before it was inscribed onto the Coligny Calendar, it was all oral. So this was all done in a spoken format. And that might be why we find some of these really old looking terms like Equos, that records an even older form of a word that is no longer current, certainly by the 2nd century AD when it's being written. So that's one of the reasons why it's a really interesting object. Another, of course, is that we simply don't have a huge number of lengthier inscriptions in Gaulish. We have quite a few shorter inscriptions, often on metal or on stone, but a great deal of our information about the Gauls comes from their enemies, especially from the Romans, from Caesar, the conquest of these peoples, rather than from the Gauls themselves. So that's what makes this really incredibly interesting. Recently, a big breakthrough has been made by Helen Mackay, who published an article in 2020 where she argued that quite possibly the cycles would be 19 or 30-year cycles, because if you calculate it that way, you don't actually have to add in any days or months. So that seems like a kind of logical explanation for that. She also argues that the start of the calendar, so in which of our months it would begin, would be either in sort of April or May time, around the time when the festival of Beltane was held, as Beltane is considered to be the start of the summer in the Celtic calendars, the other ones that we have. So that would seem to make sense here. So then we would take Samoni to indeed be related to the summer words rather than to Samhain and to the kind of November festival, like modern day Halloween and its Celtic equivalents. So that was quite a recent discovery that she made. I'll link the article there for people to follow, because she's got a whole working list of kind of working out what the equivalents would be in modern time to this calendar. And a final thing to mention here is that there's a great website, which I used as part of the research here, which is called Timey's Calendrium, all about different times calendars around the world. And there is a page on the Gaulish calendar as well, based on the Coligny calendar. And actually, it has worked out. Obviously, there's a lot more about the mathematics behind it here, which I'm not very good at explaining, but which you can find out all about here on this website. And based on Helen Mackay's calculations, the person behind this website has actually made a whole calendar. So if you want to trace where we are on the Coligny calendar, then today, which is the 12th of November, counts as the 15th day of the Equos month of the Coligny calendar. So that's really neat. I'll link that in the description below if you want to check that out. Hello everyone, thank you so much for watching this video. A little announcement from me, and that is to say that if you have looked at my Patreon in the last couple of years, you'll know that I don't really do a lot of things there, but that's going to change. That's largely because the nature of YouTube and making these YouTube videos is also changing. It used to be the case that most people watching the videos would be my subscribers, people who had subscribed because they enjoyed what I did and wanted to see more. And there are still some very familiar faces always in the comments. You know who you are, who are great, watch every video, and I love to see you there. Unfortunately, though, YouTube is pushing more and more with different kinds of algorithms. That means that increasingly YouTubers have to turn to things like clickbait and to try and attract as many non-subscribers in to watch as possible, because our videos simply aren't being shown to our subscribers. Now, unfortunately, that means that a large community aspect has gone, but somewhere where you can create that is over on Patreon, and that is what I would like to do. On the new History with Hilbert Patreon, there will be 4 paid-for tiers, as well as some benefits for free members. Free members basically will get updates semi-regularly about what's coming on the channel and a few sneak peeks. The first paid-for tier are the Skelter, who pay $2 in the month. You will receive videos early, sometimes several videos at a time even, and they will be entirely ad-free. As well as that, you'll be informed before time of when I'll be doing live streams, which will be happening semi-regularly from now on, and you'll be able to watch those once they have ended. You'll also be attributed at the end of each video with your name up on the screen. The next tier are the Frana, who pay $5. They receive the same benefits as the Skelter, as well as receiving unique patron-only content. So this is things like weekly updates or special short videos. These will be in the forms of vlogs, so perhaps visiting somewhere or making a short video on a specific topic, book reviews about what I've been reading and listening to and whether I would recommend them or not, as well as some outtakes, things that were in previous videos that I decided to then cut out. That will be available for you to watch there. You'll also be able to see what I'm working on, so to know what kind of videos will be up in the future and be updated as to my research process there. And you can submit questions to be answered in live streams by me, which will be guaranteed to be covered. And as with previously, you will be attributed at the end of the video. The next class are the Aseiran, which are paying $10 in the month, and they can request short video topics. So these are around 1 to 2 minutes, perhaps answering a specific question that you have, which will then be uploaded to the Patreon feed in answer to that. You can also gain access to those academic articles and reading lists that I've used to research particular videos. Of course, the academic articles have to be ones that I can legally send to you. I can't do that if I don't have permission, but I can send you to places where they do have those articles and other resources. You'll also be receiving updates on my academic work that I am doing inside academia, on book titles and the various books that I'm writing at the moment, and on academic publications that I'm working on. Again, with some of those being what I'm allowed to share and not allowed to share at the same time. This tier is really intended for people who are really interested and want to do more, want to find out more, maybe want to make videos of their own or research or write by themselves. This is the tier for you. Finally, the highest tier are the Gaining, or the Gainiar to use the plural. These are paying $20 in the month, and they will be really involved in the kind of videos that will be up in the future. This is not only helpful for you because then you get a say in seeing what you want to see on the channel, but it's helpful for me because then I get to sound off some of my ideas and see if people are actually interested in it. So you'll get an active say in the kinds of videos that will come up. You'll have a direct line to me as well, so you can message me and ask questions about research or about previous videos that I've made or something specific, and I will be guaranteed to get back to you. And finally, you'll get special attribution as Gaining at the end of each video, and you will be named at the end of each video too. So every person that belongs to the Gaining class will be named at the end of each video as a special thank you for your special support. So thank you very much, both for watching the video and for the little spiel about Patreon. I hope to see many of you up on Patreon there. And as I said, a huge thank you to my previous patrons who have been oh so generous and helpful in keeping me doing what I'm doing and making these videos, and hopefully making it available for the rest of you as well. And I hope to see some of you over on Patreon, but as ever, if you are unable to afford or you have other priorities, then that's completely fine, and I will keep making these videos as well. It's just very much appreciated when people can help out financially. That said, I would also like to say a huge thank you to the patrons who have supported me already in the past, over the years, and will continue to do so. And of course, if you can't contribute financially, I will keep making these YouTube videos, but those patrons who can, just ensure that I can keep making it and keep it free for other people too. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you all soon. I'm Hilbert, and this was The History.